Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jordan LaJoy. I will be taking you through today's discussion. So the agenda for today, the first thing we're going to talk about is the transition from legacy to enhanced. You all are using Retirement Online now for your legacy reporting and enrollment functions. We're going to really compare and contrast that with what you're going to do in the enhanced report. Next, we'll really dig deep into the enhanced report. How's it structured? What are the new fields and values? What do I need to be aware of, and what pieces of information do I need to report to NYSLRS in order to become an enhanced reporter? Next, we'll briefly discuss the gold certification timeline. So if you sign up for a transition group, what does that mean for you as an employer as you transition from legacy reporting to enhanced reporting? We'll then dig really deeply into the steps associated with the gold certification process, and we'll leave the day with giving all of you some next steps. These are things that you're going to do next in order to get your process for transition to enhanced reporting started. First step is from legacy to enhanced reporting. So before we go forward, let's just step back for 1 minute. Now, as many of you remember, we started with transition to bronze certification more than 2 years ago. This was in preparation for Retirement Online Go Live, and this was where you were really setting all of the security in order to make sure that you were able to perform all of the reporting, member enrollment, and view functions in Retirement Online that you needed when we went live. Now next, you reached towards silver certification. This is where you did legacy reporting training, member enrollment training. You signed into our training environment and had the opportunity to actually practice. Many of you were doing this right up until we went live. And then when we went live in May of this year, Retirement Online became your real world. We replaced RIR, we replaced RAR, we moved enrollments into Retirement Online. All of this is your real life now. Now the next step is gold certification. Gold certification is tied to the transition to enhanced reporting. So similar to silver certification, you will be training on the new reporting format. You will have the opportunity to practice in the system. But given how much new information and the transition from legacy to enhanced reporting, you're going to be working a lot with transition coaches. So while there is a lot of probably work that needs to be done, we're going to work very closely with you. And in addition, it's something that you're not going to kind of just be left out there like a sheet in the wind, for lack of a better term. We are going to work with you to build a really specific transition plan for transitioning from legacy reporting to enhanced reporting. And then we'll work with you every step of the way to complete all of the necessary mappings, practice. We'll be right there with you when you go to submit your first enhanced report. And even for the first few months after you submit that first enhanced report, we'll be working with you. Now, one key call out for gold certification is that employers are going to move to the enhanced reporting format in what we are calling transition groups, and not all at once. Because this process is more involved, we want to make sure that we're moving small enough groups that we have the ability to provide individualized support for all of the employers who are moving at any point in time. So let's briefly dive into the report formatting changes. Back in RIR and RAR, you were using a fixed width file, which you could upload in a multitude of different formats. You would submit this, and then ultimately all of the validations would run, the file would come back to you, and you would correct anything before finalizing your submission. Now that we are in Retirement Online, and you all are legacy reporters officially, the file format is largely the same, with the exception of the change for no headers, no footers, no blank rows. The biggest change that you all have seen is the need to validate and update your errors and warnings in real time as you go to post your files. When we move into enhanced reporting, a lot of things change. So the enhanced file format is what we call pipe delimited, which means it's no longer fixed width. Each new value is actually separated by a vertical pipe delimiter. Rather than accepting a multitude of file formats, we're now going to really only accept TXT files. And very similar to what you're already doing in legacy reporting in Retirement Online, you're going to need to resolve your errors and warnings prior to submitting your file. There are also many different ways that you all may report as employers. Some of our larger employers may exclusively do file uploads. And remember, the enhanced report allows you to enroll mandatory members through the file. It allows you to hire, though not enroll, optional members through the file. It allows you to submit all of your detailed days, contributions, earnings information through the file. For the large employers, especially those of you who have payroll providers, this is probably going to be your preferred path. Now, we also have manual reporting. Just like we have today in Legacy, you have the ability to create a manual enhanced report. If you're a smaller employer, maybe you don't have many employees you're reporting on a monthly basis, manual may be the best path for you. And then finally, I think we probably have a lot of employers who are going to use what we call a hybrid reporting approach. Maybe your day's contributions and earnings, you're going to report those through a file every month because you have a lot of employees. But you also may not have much turnover in your organization, so maybe you choose to complete all of your HR hires, terminations, job data updates. Maybe you choose to do all of that through a manual report. Regardless of how you elect to do this, the team will work with you to build a transition plan, make sure that you're trained on those functions, make sure that you've had the opportunity to practice, so that when you do go live in production as an enhanced reporter, you will be fully equipped to use the enhanced reporting functionality. So let's talk briefly about the differences, and these are really high level, between the legacy and enhanced reporting formats. First one is the registration number. In the legacy reporting format, you used registration numbers as your key identifier. Moving forward in the enhanced report, we're going to key everything off of the NYSLRS ID. Now, you should all be able to find your NYSLRS IDs for your existing membership base on the member contribution rates page in Retirement Online. Now, in the past, you only reported participating members using the legacy reporting format. When we move forward, we are going to ask you to report all eligible employees at your organization. This includes your participating members. This also includes your optional members who elected not to join. It includes other folks like retirees. So we're going to look for all of that reporting information, and we talk about it later, but the real benefit here, especially for those optionals who elect not to join, is that we have all of their information so that when they look 10 years down the road to join NYSLRS because they are now a full-time mandatory employee somewhere, rather than NYSLRS having to come back to you and saying, hey, can you please submit that salary and service from 10 years ago? We already have it in the system. It's not a benefit that you may necessarily see day one, but this is one that's going to really save you a lot of time and effort in the long run. When it comes to contributions and service credit and loan payments, we're just splitting those out. So in the legacy reporting format, everything's reported in a lump sum. In the enhanced reporting format, you have the ability to split those items out into pre-tax reporting items and post-tax. Now, as we continue down the key differences, we have adjustments. Now today in legacy, adjustments are reported separately. You create a specific adjustment file. In the enhanced report, you will actually be able to report adjustments in the same file that you are submitting regular days and contributions changes, days and earnings changes. Now the next change to adjustments is the way in which they're reported. So in legacy, you report the should be values. So if an employee earned $100 per your regular report, and you need that information to reflect that that employee actually earned $500 that month, you would report to NYSLRS $500. In the enhanced reporting world, you're going to report the change to the value that you previously reported. So if we go back to that same example, rather than telling NYSLRS that employee earned $500, you would report to us a plus $400 because you had previously reported $100. Now, the final really big change just comes with regard to the data that we are ultimately collecting. In the legacy reporting format, we collect days, earnings, total contributions, arrears, and loans. In the enhanced reporting format, we are going to have 4 different transactions, each of which have the ability to collect significantly more data than is actually reported to us today. So we have biographical data and job information, which when assembled together, have the ability to enroll a member. We have days and contributions, which is similar to the first half, really, of that legacy report. And then we have earnings information. And we're going to ask you to report your earnings to us on a granular level. So we want to know the difference between an employee earning overtime and earning regular earnings. Maybe an employee who is just getting some miscellaneous non-pensionable earnings. And that's one of the activities that the coaches will be going through with you, is making sure that all of the different pay codes that you use to pay your employees are mapped back to earnings codes, so that when you submit those reports, you can feel confident that you're reporting good information to us, and we can feel confident as NYSLRS that we are also receiving good information that we can use to calculate the benefit owed to your employees and members. We've really run through these benefits, but they ultimately boil down to you get better real-time information. On the NYSLRS side, and really for your members, we have improved accuracy. And then ultimately, we are able to make changes more quickly within the system. All right, next, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the enhanced report. In the enhanced reporting format, there are 4 different transaction types, all of which can be contained in one report. So we have biographical data, and we'll jump into these in a minute, but we have biographical data, which is really related to all of the bio information that you would give NYSLRS normally when you go to enroll a member. These are things like name, date of birth, address, SSN, and some other parameters. We have job data, and this is the specifics of that employee's job. So for those of you who enroll members using the enrollment dashboard on Retirement Online, it's everything that you see on that second page. So this is things like job code, pay frequency, annual compensation rates, all of that information that you're already putting into those fields. Transaction 3 is days and contributions. This is probably a little bit more familiar territory, but this is as simple as we're going to ask you to give us the days and the reported contributions. Now, the nuance here is that you may have multiple days and contributions and earnings details reports for a single employee at the end of the month, so at a report end date. And we'll talk about how that works in a minute. Finally, we have earnings details. And this is where you're going to report all of the earnings and hours that ultimately roll up to create those days and contributions. As I mentioned earlier, what we are really going to ask for here is more granular information regarding the earnings that you break out. You will even go so far as telling us the non-pensionable pay that you give to your members so that we have a full picture, or your employees rather, so that we have a full picture of what is ultimately being paid. Now, we do have some key identifiers that are required on all of the enhanced reporting transactions. And really, when I say transactions, I mean every single row, because each row can effectively constitute its own transaction. So the first field is the transaction type, which is transactions 1 through 4. That correlates to biographical data, job data, days and contributions, or earnings details. The next is the NYSLRS ID. Remember, this is replacing the registration number. Next is the last 4 digits of the employee's SSN. Now, this is something that you're already using today. And then finally, we have the first 3 characters of the employee's first name. Many of you in submitting your legacy reports, I'm sure, have had issues with control initial mismatches. People's last names change regularly. People's first names, not as often. So this will be a good way for you to all identify the employees, but also make sure that we maybe get rid of some of those reporting errors that we're seeing on a regular basis that can cause you employers frustration. Now, if we look at the different file formats, you'll notice that we have the legacy file format on the top, and we have the enhanced file format on the bottom. You can see how they look different, right? One is fixed width, one is pipe delimited. We have multiple different transactions as well in that bottom file. Now, when we talk about the new fields, the first one is NYSLRS ID. The NYSLRS ID is the new key identifier that we will use to identify all individuals within the NYSLRS system, members and non-members alike. It is an 8-digit number that begins with an R. So all of your members, as I mentioned earlier, already have NYSLRS IDs. Those are accessible on the member contribution rates page. For non-members, you are actually going to go in and you are going to complete a higher transaction for individuals who are eligible for NYSLRS membership, but who are not being enrolled. When that hire is completed, we will actually return to you the NYSLRS ID, as well as the employment instance, which is our next key identifier. Now, the employment instance, for many of you who report in the legacy format using report codes, is in some ways a replacement for that report code. Now, the employment instance is going to be specific to the NYSLRS ID and that job being reported at that point in time. It's a sequential number based on the number of jobs that the employee has worked in the past that are recorded at NYSLRS, and also the eligible retirement system for those jobs. So ERS employment instances are 0 through 49. PFRS employment instances are 50 through 99. Now, if you all actually go out and look at your member contribution rates page right now, you will see that you can view the employment instances for your current members. Now, what you may also notice is that they have an employment instance starting higher than instance 0 if they're an ERS member. Maybe it's 5, 6, 7. What that ultimately means is that that employee probably has other jobs recorded within NYSLRS system that maybe you're just not aware of. The employment instance is something that will remain static as long as that employee remains in the same job with the same plan eligibility, essentially as long as none of their job data changes. However, if you change something significant about an employee's job data that maybe moves them from one plan to another plan, or that significantly changes their job, they may get a new employment instance. So let's jump into the first transaction. So transaction 1 is biographical data. Now those values on the left side that are highlighted in pink or red, depending on how it renders on your screen, those are the key identifiers that are required on every line. So I won't jump too far into those. What you will see here is that we also require in the biographical data transaction the employee's complete social security number. This is the only time you will be asked to supply a complete social security number, and this is so that we can check to see if this person already exists in our system. If they don't, we'll create a new record. If they do, then we'll match this information that's subsequent to that record. Now, once an employee exists in our system, you as the employer don't have the ability to update their information using this biographical data transaction. So all that is to say that once we have the record of an individual, at that point and from that point forward, it's going to be their job to maintain the basic biographical information that NYSLRS keeps on record for them. So in this transaction, you will give us the name prefix, the first name, the middle name, the last name, a suffix if they have one. You'll give us their address information, and then you'll give us the date of birth and gender. Now, also worth noting is that online we have the Enhanced Reporting File Format Creators Guide, and within that you can actually see which fields are required and which fields are not. If you don't have values for a non-required field, it will be perfectly acceptable to put two pipe delimiters next to each other to tell us there's nothing that goes here. Now, this biographical data transaction is always going to be paired with a transaction 2 job data transaction. Now, the job data can be submitted without biographical data. The biographical data cannot be submitted without a corresponding job data. In this transaction, you'll see on the left side we have those same key identifiers, and then we get into the job information that we need you to send us. These are things like the job code. So we have our job code mapping tool online. You should all already be using this when you enroll members through the enrollment dashboard, or even on the actual file or paper applications that you are sending to NYSLRS. You'll populate the standard workday, whether this employee is a regular or temporary, their employee class, so if they're 12-month, provisional, 10-month, etc. You'll give us the HR transaction type, which I'm going to skip for 1 second and then come back to because that's a big change. You'll give us pay frequency, annualized rate of pay, whether the employee is full-time or part-time. You'll give us the effective date of this transaction, and you'll also give us the annual compensation rate. Another new field for you is going to be those other enrollment factors. We need you to tell us if this employee is previously retired from another New York State public retirement system, and if so, we need you to indicate the name of that system. This allows NYSLRS to complete our responsibility in tracking post-retirement earnings. Now, when it comes to HR transaction types, the most obvious one would be a hire. If you're bringing someone new into your organization, you would submit a hire. You would give us transaction 1 biographical data and transaction 2 job data. Now, let's say that someone's leaving their employment at your location. You could send us a termination for this employee so that we know that that job is no longer active. If an employee's heading out on a leave of absence, we'd like to know when they leave. This allows us to better calculate their service credit when the time comes for them to retire. When they return, you would submit a return from leave. And then let's say that there are just other components of their job that change. Maybe they went from a general job code to a job code that makes them eligible for a special plan. Maybe they went to a new job that has a different standard workday. Or maybe they went from a part-time employee to a full-time employee, thus making them mandatory. You would submit a DTA or data change transaction into that particular item so that we could then go through and actually update that employee's information. This is where a new employment instance might be created. Now we talked about enrollment through the file. Let's talk a little bit about enrollment through retirement online. So you should already be using that enrollment dashboard. As you know, you click Access Enrollment Dashboard, you populate your location code and the retirement system. This first screen up here, the one that starts with name prefix, that's all of the biographical information that you are already recording. So this would effectively be transaction 1. Step 3, the job information. Again, information you're already giving to us. This is effectively your transaction 2. Now finally, you get to review membership details, and then you get all of the reporting information. So when it comes to actually receiving that reporting information, we've received questions about how do I get NYSLRS IDs for non-members. That information would be passed back to you right here. If they are new members, that information would also be passed back to you right here to put into your payroll system, and so that you can ultimately begin reporting those employees. So let's talk a little bit about employment instances and when you might report jobs separately versus when you may actually report them together. So we're going to ask you to report jobs separately if they have different job titles or different meaningful components of the job that makes it so that we can't actually calculate that information in one job. The best example, or a few good examples rather, different standard work days, or different eligible benefit plans. So down here in the example, you'll see job 1, which is employment instance 0, has a job title of detective investigator and is actually eligible for benefit plan 6030R, while job 2 at the same location is bus driver, and this is eligible for benefit plan A15. While they do have the same standard workday, they're clearly different retirement benefit plans, and as such, we're going to need you to report that information separately. Now, let's go to the next example where you would roll those together. We have job 1 and job 2. You can see that they're both being reported under employment instance 0. In this case, we have an individual with a job title of aide, as well as a job title of secretary. They're both general titles, and they're both eligible for the A15 benefit plan. They have the same standard workday, so you would actually just report these folks in one employment instance rather than breaking them out. Now, if your payroll system is set up to track them separately, it is perfectly fine to report them to us in 2 separate employments. However, you do have the ability to roll these together. Now, we talked about using the NYSLRS ID as the new identifier instead of the registration number, and this really comes through the enrollment-only reports. Now, the way that you actually complete this mapping is really, it's a kind of 2 different paths depending on the type of employee. For existing members, the registration number and NYSLRS ID both already exist on that member contribution rates page. So you can go to that page, you can look up your employees by their current registration number, pull in their new NYSLRS ID, and you've got your mapping. Now, for all new employees that you hire once you transition to the enhanced reporting format, regardless of whether they are members or optional and non-members, you will actually receive their NYSLRS ID either from a new hire summary, if you are completing that hire through the file, or through the confirmation that you receive on the enrollment dashboard. Now, I want to talk really quickly about the enrollment-only report. You have the ability to submit all of the transactions, so bio, job, days, and earnings, in a single enhanced report. However, what we found based on piloting this with some early adopters is that most employers prefer to submit what we call an enrollment-only report, and you submit this on an ad hoc basis. So let's say that you hired 10 new employees mid-month. You could build that enrollment report out and submit that in the middle of the month. That way, you have all of the reporting information for those employees in real time. Now, it's not to say that you couldn't hire them and report them in the enhanced report when you do finally post that at the end of the month. However, the enrollment-only report gets you that information as soon as possible and allows you to start the appropriate payroll deductions and everything else much more quickly. So we generally recommend that employers maintain those enrollments in real time rather than waiting for the end of month. Over here, we just have an example of an enrollment-only report. Now remember earlier, I talked about if you are going to submit a hire, you're going to need a biographical transaction, and the biographical transaction, which is transaction 1, will always be paired with a transaction 2. So here you can actually see 3 different employees that we are hiring through an enrollment-only report, and this is a really good example of what that report might look like for you as an employer. Now, because they're being hired through the file, once this report is actually posted, which happens more or less in real time, you would be able to go in and download a new hire summary to get all of the necessary reporting information for these folks. Any who were automatically enrolled because they may be mandatory members would also appear on your member contribution rates page. An individual is a mandatory member of NYSLRS if they are working at a NYSLRS participating employer and they are a full-time, regular 12-month employee earning at least the current state minimum wage, or if they are a paid police officer or firefighter. So all PFRS employees are required members. Now, that being said, you may have different employment types and classes that are not necessarily employee. Again, we're going to ask you to report those folks to us if they are eligible for NYSLRS membership, so that is to say in any position that makes them eligible for NYSLRS membership, and then the system will determine whether they are mandatory or optional based on the information that you supply, and we will either just complete a hire so that you have the ability to give us the information for that non-member, or it will complete an enrollment. Now, the one point to emphasize here is that you may have individuals or you may have employees who are eligible for multiple New York State retirement systems. So you may have employees who have one job that is TRS eligible, Teachers Retirement System, with another job that is New York State and Local Retirement System or NYSLRS eligible. Our ask is that you only report to us the employment information for the NYSLRS eligible job. So let's talk a little bit about some of the HR transactions and job data changes. At the very beginning of an employee's employment, you will complete the hire transaction so that you are able to report that individual to us. At some point, there are parameters of their job that might change. Now, there are some parameters that are very significant. There are others that aren't as significant from a benefit determination perspective at NYSLRS. This is something that your transition coaches will work with you to understand as you complete job or HR transaction mapping. We have data changes. Again, this is where those parameters for the job might change, and you would actually submit this for an already existing employee. Again, we talked about this earlier, but maybe their standard workday changes. Maybe their job code changes. Now, we talked about the different leaves of absence. We want to know when those employees come and go from your organization so that we can accurately calculate the benefit they are due. And finally, terminations. Now, this is not to be confused with terminating an individual's membership. This is terminating that specific job at your employer location. This will allow you to accurately maintain your records and also allow NYSLRS to track the ins and outs of your employees correctly throughout their entire NYSLRS membership and participation. Now, we talked about a job data change, but let's just run through a really quick scenario. So we have an employee who has been hired at a location. They have a job code of 4600E, which is just a general ERS job code. And maybe they switch to a very specific job code that makes them eligible for a different benefit plan. So maybe a corrections officer type job code. You would submit that to us as a DTA with the new job code, and we would actually update all of that individual's information in our system so that we made sure that we were accurately collecting all of their days, contributions, earnings information, and lumping that into the correct benefit plan for when that individual goes to retire. The other time that we really want those data changes are when there are changes to the employee's parameters of employment. So if they go from part-time to full-time, they may now be mandatory and the system may automatically enroll them. Or if they go from a temporary position to a regular position, again, they may now be mandatory and that may result in an enrollment. Now, when you do go through for the first time and report all of your NYSLRS eligible employees who are not yet members, you actually may find that you have some folks working at your organization who are already NYSLRS members. This process will help to pick that up and make sure that we get their accounts back on track. The next transaction is transaction 3, which is the days and contributions, and we're really now stepping into more comfortable and familiar territory. So again, key identifiers on the left-hand side. This is the same information that we've already talked about. These 4 items will appear at the beginning of every single row in the enhanced report. The next values are related to the pay period. So we're going to want the payroll end date. It will still be the end of the month. We're going to want the number of pay cycles in the period, and we're going to want to know whether this is a regular or adjustment row being submitted. Remember, you can submit regular and adjustment reports all in the same file. We're going to want to know the days, And then finally, we have all of the deduction information that's split out based on pre-tax and post-tax, as well as loans and SCP. The big change here is if you have an employee who has multiple employment instances at your location, we would expect one transaction 3 for each of those employment instances at the location. So if we go back to that early example where we had someone who I believe was a bus driver and a detective investigator, and you were reporting earnings and days for both, we would expect 2 transaction 3s to appear for that same NYSLRS ID, first 3 characters of the first name, last 4 digits of the SSN. The only differentiator would be the employment instance. Now, in terms of when are transaction 3s required, they're required for all employees who have days worked in the payroll period where contributions, loans, or service credit payments were taken out. And again, this is required for each individual employment instance. Now, this should reflect actual days worked based on the employee's work days and not just, or standard work day, and not necessarily just the number of days that happen to fall in a period. Finally, we get on to transaction 4, and here's the earnings details. Again, we have the same key identifiers. Now we get into the pay period specifics. So we have payroll end date, and then we have regular or adjustment indicator, because again, we can submit regular or adjustment in the enhanced report. Next, we have the earnings information. So we have the reported earnings code, the reported earnings amount, and the reported earnings hours. So we want to know not only what code did the employee earn earnings under, maybe they're just all regular earnings, but we want to know how much they earned, and then also the hours that went with those earnings. And we'll actually give an example of that in a minute. But the earnings codes are really a line item breakdown of the different components of an employee's paycheck. And I've given examples throughout today's discussion, but these are things like overtime, regular earnings, maybe miscellaneous non-pensionable type earnings. If you have some earnings that they're pensionable, but they don't really fall perfectly into an existing category. Things like holiday pay, lump sum vacation. I believe there's something like 16 earnings codes, and again, this is another activity where your transition coaches will work with you to complete a mapping of the pay codes you use in your system to the earnings codes that we use. Now, as I already discussed, earnings are stored by NYSLRS ID and employment instance. Now, we want you to report all of the earnings codes that a NYSLRS ID and employment instance received in that particular pay period. So when we talked about transaction 3, days and contributions, we said we expect 1 row for each employment instance that was paid in that pay period. For earnings details, we expect multiple rows such that you report to us all of the earnings for that employee in that specific employment instance. And what does that really look like? We've got an example right here. So as you can see, all of these earnings that are currently being reported are for the payroll end date of 5/31/2019. They're all regular earnings, but when you look over at the earnings code, you'll see that we actually have 4 different earnings codes being reported for a single employee and employment instance. So this employee earned $3,000 of regular earnings, which was tied to 152 hours. This employee has an 8-hour standard workday, which means they should be receiving 19 hours of credit for those 152 hours of earnings under that regular code. Now, they also worked a holiday in that time period. They worked 8 hours and earned 224 hours. $224, I'm sorry. Now, they have that 8-hour standard workday, which means that they would get another day of service credit for that days and contributions portion of this report, tying to this employment instance for that report end date. So in total, this employee earned 20 days of service for this month. Now, they can't earn more than essentially a day in a day. So they were eligible to earn 20 days, they worked every day, or they were paid for work every day, they earned 20 days. Now this employee also has some other earnings. They have overtime. So they worked 20 hours of overtime and earned $560. They've already earned the maximum service credit in that month to which they are entitled. However, those $560 still are pensionable earnings. As a result, you would need to take contributions on that. And when we calculated the contributions owed for the month, we would factor those overtime earnings in. Now, finally, the employee received $152 for 4 days of a meal allowance or per diem. That's money that you paid to the employee, but it's not pensionable. So that just falls under the miscellaneous non-pensionable earnings code. And now what you're doing is you've reported to us all of the different earnings that this particular employee had in a month. We are able to build their full retirement picture calculate the contributions owed, make sure that this employee, by the time they get to retirement, is fully vested and their accounts are all 100% current. Now, even this example may sound a little confusing. Again, don't worry. This is one of the key activities in your transition, is your transition coaches will work with you, as well as the rest of the organization. So employer reporting, BCDS, even legal if we have to make sure that we get your pay codes mapped to our earnings codes correctly. So here we have what a regular report might look like in the enhanced reporting format. A few different values. So up at the very top, we have the 5-digit location code. This is something that will appear on the top of every enhanced report you submit, whether it's enrollment only, or a true enhanced report. You have the different transactions that could potentially appear in that report. And then you also have some regular and adjustment transactions. Now again, it's up to you how you use the system and how you use this. So you may only ever elect as an employer or payroll provider to submit regular earnings or regular reports in one, adjustments in another. Maybe you choose to do your adjustments entirely through manual. That is entirely up to you as an employer. Now we also have that manual reporting option. So up in that employee summary section, you effectively see the days and contributions, transactions and fields. As you go down into earnings details required for reported earnings, you see the earnings transactions. And then as you go even farther down, you see job data. Here's where you could effectively complete the job data transactions that you might need to do in order to hire, terminate, rehire, or put on a leave of absence an employee. For those of you already using manual reporting in the legacy format, you'll know that one of the real benefits to using this is that you get to click validate while you're still on that page, correct any errors before you finally save and submit. It's the same thing with the enhanced reporting. So next, we're going to step into the gold certification timeline. And this section is very quick. I believe it's actually one slide. As I mentioned earlier, we're not moving all of the employers over into into the enhanced report all at once. We're using what are called transition groups. Our current plan is to have 10 transition groups where each employer effectively spends 3 months in active transition, so completing transaction and job code mapping and practicing and resolving all of the errors and making sure that their systems are up to date and working very closely with their transition coaches, followed by submitting their first enhanced report at the end of those 3 months, and then 3 months in what we call hypercare. Now, hypercare is where you, as the employer who just transitioned to the enhanced reporting format, have a direct line to the transition coaches rather than maybe going through the traditional employer support structure, just so that you have a little bit more hands-on support. Additionally, in hypercare, our employer reporting staff are going to be looking at the first few reports you submit to identify any inconsistencies or issues, to really make sure that we've addressed those before you're off into the races. Now, you may ask, what will impact the transition group that I should be in? And there are probably a lot of key identifiers that are really unique to each different organization. However, some things that we definitely know will impact your ability and readiness to transition include when your payroll provider or in-house IT shop is actually equipped to create the enhanced reporting file for you. We know that if you have large hire classes, or maybe you have times of the year that are really busy, that may be either a really good time to transition or a not so good time to transition. And then there may be a ton of other factors that indicate your preference for when you're going to transition. Now, suffice to say, we can't just slot you into a transition group and think that it's going to fit your employer needs. We're going to ask you to start this process by filling out a really comprehensive transition survey. You're going to be able to indicate, among other things, your preferred transition group, if you have payroll providers, the number of members in your organization, the number of non-members who are eligible, so that we can start prioritizing direct transition coach outreach to your location, so we can figure out which transition group you belong in, what's the right time for your employer, and then lock you into that transition group and begin your transition process. Now down below, I do just have an example timeline. So let's say that we had an employer in transition group 2. They would spend October through December working with their transition coaches to get ready to report in the enhanced format. They would submit their December report in January in the enhanced format. They would have that hypercare support from January through March. And then from March on, they would just be a regular reporter. Now we're going to get into the specifics of the gold certification activities for employers and payroll providers. This process is really a very well thought out and a detailed 8-step process. Now, it breaks down ultimately to assignment to a transition group, completion of training, file build if applicable. Again, those employers who are going to report on the enhanced report format using manual will go or would skip this step. We'll go through data alignment activities. So again, this is completing the mapping of job codes, HR transactions, earnings codes, etc. There's the operational prep and training. We will validate business scenarios with you. So if we learn that you're going to use the system in one of 5 different ways, we will validate all of those 5 different ways and the detailed transactions to make sure that they're coming out of your system properly, that our system is reading them properly, and that you feel comfortable with how to use them. Then we'll flip the switch and make you an enhanced reporter in Production Retirement Online. We'll complete the other operational preparation steps, and then we will work with you to submit your first enhanced file. So what does that really look like? First step, assignment to a transition group. As I already talked about, we're going to send you a survey. We ask that you get the right people in the room in your organization, so everyone who would be impacted by this, and go ahead and fill out that survey. One of the things that you will do is indicate your preferred transition groups. Now you get to rank all of our transition groups 1 through 10, and we will do our best to fit all of the employers into the best transition group for them. Once we receive that survey back, a transition coach will be reaching out to you. They'll schedule a consultation call to make sure that they really understand your survey, to discuss some of the ramifications of the selections that you've made, and then ultimately to lock you into or get you registered into a transition group. Now, it's not to say that that can't change, but at this point, this is meant to be a really two-way conversation to make sure that you're comfortable with the transition group that you're in, and that we're comfortable with starting to work with you in order to get that transition kicked off. The next step is going to be training. So based on that consultation call, your transition coaches are going to develop a really detailed transition plan for you. This includes which of those transactions do I need to map within my organization? What training do I need to do? What file submission scenarios do I need to practice? Do I need to practice using manual reporting? And a lot more. But once that transition plan is delivered to you, you'll complete your training. Now we have, I believe it is 6 different training courses that will be specified for that particular transition effort. Once you complete those, you'll move into potentially your file build, and really step 3 and step 4 kind of go together, and data mapping. For those of you who have an in-house IT provider, that is someone who codes your file in-house rather than a payroll provider, you'll want to begin building your file. For those of you who are working with a payroll provider who maybe hasn't built a file yet, we will work with you and your payroll provider to get that built and get that vetted. Now, once we know that the file looks good, it's able to spit out the 4 different transactions that we're expecting, everything formats properly, we'll get into data alignment activities. This is where you're really going to focus on mapping the titles that you use in your organization to NYSLRS job codes, the pay codes that you use in your organization to NYSLRS earnings codes, and the different HR transactions that you use to track your employees and staff, and mapping those to NYSLRS HR transactions. As I mentioned earlier, we will work not only with our transition coaches or with your transition coaches, but also with employer reporting and any other impacted party within NYSLRS to make sure that when we get to the end of this data alignment exercise, all of your data should be good to go, and you should be good to report using that enhanced reporting format. Now, specifically for the job codes, again, we do have the job code tool online. You should be using that right now because many of you, and in fact, probably most of you, are completing enrollments through the enrollment dashboard. So please go online and use that. As I said, we will be mapping job codes to job titles. Earnings codes. We had the question earlier. We want you to report essentially all earnings for all positions that are NYSLRS eligible, regardless of whether that employee is a member or a non-member. We'll work with you again to map your internal pay codes to our NYSLRS earnings codes, and then you get those uploaded into your payroll system or into your HR system for report creation, and you should be able to generate your report relatively easily on a monthly basis. And same story with HR transactions. So we will map your internal HR transactions to our HR transactions, in order to make sure that you are comfortable with reporting to us the data changes and job changes that your employees will go through during their employment. Now, for operational preparation, you're really going to do this step twice. You're going to do it once in our training environment and then once in production. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to pull down the existing information for all of your existing members. Then you will hire or enroll all of your current non-members. Once you have the reporting information for your entire population, you're going to start submitting to us the different reports that are necessary to validate the different transactions, files, and business scenarios that you are ultimately going to use as an employer. This will be an iterative process. You'll submit with your transition coaches the first time, and maybe something on the file won't come out of the system quite correctly. So you may need to go back and update that piece of info, and when you fix that, the next time you'll submit, and maybe we hit something else. The idea of this process is to make sure that you as an employer and we as NYSLRS have had the opportunity to iron out all of the kinks before we get you into the enhanced reporting format for real in production. One of the approaches that our transition coaches will be using is actually WebEx screen sharing. So when you do these file validations and business scenario validations, a lot of what they're going to be doing is working with you to look at your screen and what you're seeing so that they can better help you assess where there may be issues in the file or issues in the transaction that you're posting at that point in time. Now, once you have actually validated all of your transactions and scenarios, we're going to work with our internal technical teams to flip the switch, so to say, and turn you into an enhanced reporter. Once this happens, you'll go through all of those steps again that we just practiced. So you'll pull down the information for existing members. You'll upload and hire or enroll all of the other folks at your organization who are in NYSLRS eligible jobs. You'll load that information into your payroll system. And then finally, you will spit out your first enhanced report, and with the help of your transition coaches, you will upload and post that report. And at that point, you are gold certified and you are an enhanced reporter. Now for the next 3 months, you will have the advantage of that hypercare type support. So when you have questions or issues relating to enhanced reporting, you'll be able to come right to us and have a direct line to those transition coaches. You'll also have the advantage of having our employer reporting staff keeping an eye on those reports, identifying any issues that might pop up so that we can work with you to reconcile those early rather than having you figure those out or having your members figure those out 10 years down the road. So for next steps, and they're pretty simple, take the survey, please. Please make sure that you have all of the right folks in the room to respond to this survey. Enhanced reporting doesn't just impact the person who submits your report. It impacts your payroll departments. It impacts your personnel departments. It may impact your IT staff and your payroll providers. It impacts your HR groups. Please make sure that you've got the right people weighing in on this process so that you are setting yourself up for success as you transition to that enhanced report. Once we receive that survey, we're going to start prioritizing our consultation calls. This process has already started and our team is just ramping up those calls. So we get that survey back, we're going to schedule you for a consultation call, we're going to clarify the details of what was in that survey, and then we're going to get you slotted into a transition group. Once you're slotted into a transition group and after that call, you will receive your customized transition plan. And then when the time comes, you will begin starting to work with your transition coaches to begin that transition. Now, if you, for example, slotted into transition group 2 and you felt like you needed to start some conversations now or needed to start some mapping now, those are the types of things that we would ask you to do on your own as an employer. We've dedicated essentially 3 months to each transition group to work with you, though we will work with you until you are successful. That being said, you may need to start some conversations now just so that you can be ready 6 months down the road. So please keep that in mind as you're going through this consultation process and this survey process. Just a quick plug for our support resources. You can call our employer support call tree at 1-844-619-9614. Here you have multiple options regarding the types of support that you might need. You can also email us at the retirement helpdesk at osc.ny.gov. You can also visit our website online. We look forward to talking to and working with you in the near future.